Okay. Here is the park, Balboa Park. And what I'm going to do is I will start with the part that's most familiar. Balboa Park is basically 3 sections, and they have very inventive names. My cursor here is on East Mesa. The area you're familiar with is called Central Mesa, and the other area is called West Mesa. They're divided by canyons. So we will start in Central Mesa, then we'll proceed to West Mesa, and then finally, the area that's probably least known by people will go to East Mesa. I'm going to share with you a little bit of the history of the park, and then we'll start looking at the gardens. These, if you're not familiar with it, at the intersection of Park and Laurel, this is Founders Plaza. And these statues represent 3 of the key men who were instrumental in the development of Balboa Park. To the right is Mr. Marston. The Marston name should be quite familiar to you. Less familiar may be Horton. Well, you would know Horton from Horton Park, Horton Plaza, a developer, but also the 3rd gentleman there was probably the most instrumental. His name is Ephraim Morse, and it was actually his idea to set aside land from the original rancho for the people of San Diego into perpetuity. And of course, very involved in all of this was Kate Sessions, known as the mother of Balboa Park. This is a statue by Ruth Hayward. And what she's holding in her hand is not a pine cone. It's actually an echeveria that was from my garden. This is what the park looked like when it was first bequeathed to San Diego. After 75 years of habitation, the land has been stripped. They raised cattle. They took off the native vegetation. They raised cattle, and there was not much to look at. So they really didn't feel like they were giving much but bare land to the citizens of San Diego at this point. However, we're a very energetic and enthusiastic group, and we've made a little bit more of it than this original plot. The first thing was Arbor Day. And here the citizens of this city banded together. They realized that they didn't want a bare wasteland, and they started to plant trees. I believe that this is Cabrillo Canyon. And you can see everyone's involved in planting trees in the park. They're much more energetic than I would be, because all of these trees initially, to get them started, had to be hand watered. Enthusiastic about the area, recognizing that San Diego is the first city that the sailors and explorers came to in the United States from Europe, coming around the Cape. Everyone was excited about the development of the Panama Canal. And San Diegans put forth a proposition to Washington to get funds for an exposition to celebrate this wonderful event. Even though they had the idea first, unfortunately, San Francisco had more political pull, and they got the federal funding for an exposition. And indeed, they put on their exposition, but not to be overdone, the citizens of San Diego put together their own funds and created the Panama, California Exposition in 1915, celebrating the opening of the Panama Canal. These pioneers were so inventive. They were so enthusiastic about their community and the potential that it held. that it was a united group that really created so much of what we have available here today. So this was an illustrated vision of the bay, which I absolutely love. And they also envisioned flooding the Cabrillo Canyon, having Venetian-like boats, a fantastical city on the hill. Sorry about the binding in the book where I got this, but I think you can recognize that it's a familiar picture in concept of the exposition that was actually created. And here's an early photograph of that exposition. Not that different from the envisioned fantastical city. You can see how many more trees have been planted by 1915. You can see the buildings, and the original arcade area is back behind where where the zoo is currently located. None of those buildings have been retained, but the central core of what we are familiar with in Balboa Park is available there. And it was called the Garden Exposition because it was full of plants and gardens. They weren't quite done when the exposition opened, so all of the gardeners put on green clothing and continued to plant plants the last few days after the opening of the exposition. Some things are very familiar to us. This, of course, is the Botanical Building with the lily pond. As originally envisioned by Alfred Robinson. And I love this view of the exposition. I don't know if the little icons of people are available to you, but up in the right corner is the biplane. And I'm sure that's the way in which this photo was taken. But it included orchards. One of the things that they wanted to demonstrate, in addition to what most expositions demonstrate, which are technological innovations, is they wanted to show people what would grow in San Diego and what a wonderful environment could be had here. So with the exposition, the dreams were realized and they set the stage for what we have now. I'm going to be going through the gardens of the Central Mesa, including Alcazar Palm Canyon, the Cactus Garden. You can read all of the areas where we're going. And I hope you'll enjoy seeing. Many of these will be familiar to you. Of course, as you come into the park, you see the tower. There were only 4 permanent buildings that were built for the exposition, and the California Tower was one of them, in addition to the entrance of the park. The Alcazar Garden is the first that you'll come to, and this was actually re-envisioned in the 1935 exposition to the format that it has now. But this garden is one of the only gardens that has seasonal plantings. And the staff of the park and a large group of volunteers, the Garden Stewards, which is a volunteer program through Forever Balboa Park, helped to plant this garden seasonally so that it retains the beauty year-round. I know many of you will remember when this used to be a parking lot. We now call it San Diego's living room, which is the Plaza de Balboa. It's a wonderful place. It's always active. The artificial turf isn't always there, and the planters change their plantings from time to time. But it's created a wonderful space for people to meet and gather and enjoy the park. And one of the features of the plaza is the fountain. When I was with Friends of Balboa Park, when we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the exposition, one of the programs that I developed was called the Adopt-A-Plot program. When I was talking with the people at Parks and Recreation, and we were planning this wonderful vision of celebration, I asked the director of horticulture what was the budget that was set aside so that we could refresh the gardens in the park, because they had gotten into a fairly sad condition. And the answer was exactly $0 were allocated for gardens in the park. So I said that this is really unacceptable. And I sent out letters and made phone calls to various organizations and people that I knew in the horticulture industry and said, we're going to have this wonderful celebration. Is there any way that you would like to help? And we developed a program whereby organizations could adopt gardens in the park. And their commitment was for 1 year to plant and maintain those gardens. And this is a representation of what happened. The Dahlia Society just took it full bore, and the park, and they actually extended their commitment for another couple of years. Dahlias take a lot of maintenance to keep them looking good, and the volunteers from that organization did a fabulous job in helping our park look its best for the exposition celebration. This is another area that was planted by designers in San Diego. This had been a seasonal bed, and the park was looking at that point in time at reducing the water use in the park. So currently the only seasonal beds are around the fountain and Alcazar Garden. And this created beauty and color and texture year-round with plants that flower at some points, but the foliage always kept the garden interesting with texture and color. I believe this has been recently replanted by Parks and Recreation. One of the gardens that was developed for the 1935 exposition was the Cactus Garden, which is located behind the Balboa Park Club. And this has recently been designated, and its official name now, recognizing its first founder is the Kate O. Sessions Cactus Garden. And the sign that's in the garden now has information about the history of the garden. You'll find historical signs throughout the park. This is one of the newest ones, which includes a Spanish translation. It's a beautiful area, which not a lot of people realize is there. And again, the garden stewards, it was kind of in a tangle, and the garden stewards have done a beautiful job cleaning it up, despite vandals setting fires nearby it and vandals coming in and destroying cactus plants. It's really well maintained now and a wonderful site if you haven't had an opportunity to go by and see it. Here's just one viewpoint of the garden. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Japanese garden. This predates the Adopt-A-Plot program, but the Japanese Society has been developing this garden for a very long time, and they maintain it as well and do such an incredible job. It really is such a wonderful space, constantly changing, and beautiful planting, going all the way down the hill into the canyon, meticulously groomed, and a beautiful spot in Balboa Park. It's really a treasure. Along the path, oops, Along that pathway, behind the El Prado restaurant is the Del Rey Moro garden. It's more of a green space garden. There aren't any flowering plants here, but it's a wonderful, quiet space and lots of events, particularly weddings, are held in this part of the garden. If you follow that walkway around the edge of the Japanese Friendship Garden, you'll come to one of my favorite spots. I love this fountain. It's a Persian water carpet. And in addition to the color, and you have the sound of the water, and it's a feature that was originally designed millennia ago, and harkens back to the Mediterranean origins of the design of the park. Another way to approach this garden is from the Prado. If you stand where you can see the Botanical Building at the Prado and turn 180 degrees and look down the stairway. This is at the base of that stairway. And this is another garden that was refreshed. This is turning around from the water carpet, looking at the Botanical Building and the gardens on either side of the Botanical Building. The garden stewards, there are roses in the garden now, and the garden stewards recently pruned them. I'm looking for a really wonderful season after all of the rain that we've had this year. Moving east along the Prado, this is the Zorro Garden. And the Zorro Garden has been designated as a pollinator garden for butterflies. It's a bit of a challenge because of all of the shade that comes from the big ficus to the south of the garden. But the gardeners work real hard at keeping flowers in the garden for the butterflies. You may know this garden. We have this historical sign about it. It was, again, in the 35 exposition, it was a nudist colony. I don't know of many other parks in the country that have housed nudist colonies as a feature for their expositions, but you can read all about it. Along the pathway, if you walk south past the Zorro Garden, is Zorro Canyon. And this is a relatively new garden in the park. The California Native Plant Society recognized that if you have a pollinator garden, the pollinators may feast in the pollinator garden, but that's not where they live. So the California Native Plant Society took on this site as a habitat garden, where the butterflies and the pollinators can live while they feast in the pollinator garden. They've done it in a formal garden setting. There are blooms in the garden all times of year, but it's an evergreen garden. And it's really quite a wonderful space that not very many people realize that this is a space that is also a habitat. Parks and Recreation were so delighted with what was done on what you see to the left that they asked the Native Plant Society to plant a mirror garden to the right in what had been a rather bare triangle. And you can see that the native plants are thriving, and it's a lovely spot. Unfortunately, the area to the right of these two gardens is not very well tended. And when we have volunteers, we try and take the weeds out, but it's not under the control of the adopters. And this is another view of the triangular part of the garden, which now has a pathway through it and some rocks for seating. And it's a very nice environment. A little bit different is the garden that was adopted by the San Diego Horticultural Society. This is at the east side of the Timken Gallery, and it shows the texture and foliage color throughout the year with these exotic plants, which will also grow so well in San Diego. The Horticultural Society adopted and planted it, and it has been maintained by Parks and Recreation, but it's relatively easy maintenance because of the density of the planting. And it really is quite a lovely space. One more view of it. And of course, there's the Botanical Building. This is not what it looks like right now. Right now, it is a skeleton. It has construction fencing around it, and I didn't think that that would be a very good picture to share. But in a few years, well, I'm not sure when they'll be done. That's up to the construction people. Ideally, at the end of this year, with the funding that we have now, the building will be reconstructed, and they're going to add the facade, the original facade on the building, and they're going to extend its space somewhat so that it can become an educational area, and in addition to the wonderful tropical plants, shade plants that are in the building. So we're looking forward to that in the future. This is just one view of what the Botanical Building had held and what we can look forward to in the future. A project of the Friends of Balboa Park was actually envisioned originally by Parks and Recreation. The Moreton Bay Fig, of course, had fencing around it. It was pretty industrial fencing. And the only reason the fencing was there was because this tree was so loved by the citizens of San Diego and visitors that the weight of the footprints of all the people loving the tree had actually disturbed the health of the tree. So with the help of one of our directors, Pat Coy, a new concept was developed. It's a platform which has minimal disturbance to the roots of the trees, where people can walk up on the platform and actually experience being in the canopy of the Moreton Bay Fig. So it's a wonderful space. It has information about the tree and its history and ficus in general. There are a couple of benches, dedicated benches that were created from trees that had been taken out of Balboa Park. So it's recycling the resources of the park and sharing this wonderful space with everybody in San Diego. We're going to go over the bridge. This is the bridge that goes over Park Boulevard. And I don't have a good image of it, but I wanted to mention, in case you go to the park, to pay attention to the plantings that are in the median of Park Boulevard, because those were redone and reflect the gardens that are on either side of the park in that area. So as you go past the desert garden in the median, you'll see desert plants. As you go past the rose garden in the median, you'll see roses. So pay attention, it's interesting. The Viennese Rose Garden is one of the top 10 rose gardens in the world. And it is maintained not only by staff of Parks and Recreation, but a very dedicated Rose Corps volunteer group. And it's in the process now of being expanded, because each year new roses, the top new roses, are added to the garden. And they're also in this expansion, they're going to include additional lighting, and the wooden arbor that was developed for the climbing roses is declining now, and a new arbor will be built for the climbing roses. So gardens are ephemeral, they're ever changing. And I think the new additions in this garden are going to be quite exciting. Just north of the Rose Garden is the Desert Garden. This is separate from Kate Sessions' Cactus Garden. They do have two names, although both of them are sometimes referred to as desert gardens. This includes plants that are desert plants from around the world. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to include labels. It's been tried from time to time, but they keep disappearing in the park. I don't know what people do with a label from a plant without the plant there. I have no idea where they go, but it's a wonderful example of plants that can grow in very low water environments. And I remember one time I went to the Exotic Plant Society, and my husband went with me, and he said, "I don't understand why these plants are considered exotic." He said, "They're all in your garden." And I said, well, that's because they can grow here. And this is a demonstration of how they can grow. So my garden, of course, is always changing, but it's a wonderful space, and it's a great place to get ideas. So that's the Central Park area. What we're going to do now is go over to areas that are probably not as familiar to you. So we're going to start at the north end of the West Mesa. And these are some of the places we will be going to. Some may be familiar, some may be less familiar. We'll start with the Marston House. This is an older picture. The gardens at the Marston House have been much improved since this time. And when you go to the Marston House, one of the things you would really want to do, and I'm sorry I don't have a picture of it, is to look at the other side of the house. There's a lovely area with roses and a little kind of entertainment area where it's a more private space. Moving south, I'm not sure if you're aware of the Trees for Health Garden. This has been maintained for a couple of decades now, all by volunteers who were interested in showing the people of San Diego plants that have medicinal uses from around the world, both medicinal and edible. And it's about, I think it's around 6 acres. This is just one example of some of the plants that are in this garden. And there are 3 or 4 different walkways that have these signs in front of them explaining the medicinal use of the plants that are included in the garden. Again, there has been a team of volunteers who do the primary maintenance in this garden. There's one improvement that's going to be happening now, the pathways, which have been DG, and with all the rains, they've declined quite a bit and were not as safe as they should be. We're working in partnership with the California Conservation Corps to redo the pathways so that more of the plants are accessible for view. Here's another image from the Trees for Health garden. Moving south, the next area is called Cypress Point. Gardening in San Diego has been an experiment. And originally there were species of cypress that were planted all over this particular point. It's not a good area for cypress to thrive, and they died out. So the next experiment in the park was a collection of araucarias. Like the monkey puzzle tree, the Norfolk Island pine. So Cypress Point is now inhabited by the araucarias in the park, and they're fascinating trees. And there's enough space to be able to see the configuration of these wonderful, weird, exotic trees. This is an old photo now because another experiment in the park was redwoods. We're really quite far south. The natural redwood habitat really stops at about Santa Barbara. And for nearly 100 years, these trees were kept alive and grown within that time frame in their own native habitat. They would have been several times the size that they were, and definitely more healthy. So when we had the water shortages, the decision was made that the park had to set an example for the citizens of San Diego. How they had been keeping this grove alive was that they had watered once every 2 weeks for 24 hours. When that water was cut off, the redwoods just started into decline. So the redwoods were cut down except for a couple of examples. And the wood was actually harvested, and part of it is now being stored for other projects in the park. So this is an initial project which we envisioned when we were the other organization. It was called Trees to Treasures, recognizing that this wood didn't have to go to the landfill. It could really have a second life. And that's important because when the trees store a tremendous amount of carbon, and if it's just chipped and mulched, or if it's just buried in a landfill, you lose that carbon storage. So we're trying, and I will be working again on a program to recycle these trees in a more ecological format. Oh, the plantings that are being done now are in native trees. Just south of this area is the Bowling Green, which is a much-used space on Sundays. This is an example of where grass is utilized and turf is appropriate in the park. To the left of the Bowling Green area is a grove of trees, which has most recently been recognized as Hesperaloes that were from seeds that Kate Sessions brought. She did a trip with Brandagie down into Baja California, brought the seeds back to San Diego, and the palms were from the seeds that she brought back. They're not looking tremendously good currently we're dealing with issues now of the South American palm weevil. And I think that some of them have been infested with the palm weevil, which is extremely unfortunate. Once again, an alien species with no predators has come into the area. Oh, these are the trees as they are now, and I'm hoping that some of them will be saved. Again, moving south is an area that the Parks and Recreation people call Four Corners. This is the intersection of Laurel coming into the park and Balboa Drive, which is the street that goes north to south in the park. This was an area that was adopted by the Mission Hills Garden Club for the centennial. They really improved it, and there's been much better care taken of it since then, although it's now under the aegis of Parks and Recreation, but they're doing a lovely job in keeping planting here. It's no longer seasonal planting, it's more permanent planting with perennials. Here again, at this intersection, we see Founders Plaza. The master gardeners are taking care of the plants that are in and around Founders Plaza. They have challenges. There's been an infestation of ground squirrels, and for 2 years during COVID, they were not allowed by the University of California to work in the gardens. So they're busy now refreshing these gardens, and they're looking much better. We also have issues with homeless. There is a fountain to the right of Mr. Marston, and some of the homeless decided that that's a wonderful place to bathe. So there are challenges, but we're maintaining the beauty of the park as best we can. Right across the street from Founders Plaza is Kate Sessions, and she has a wonderful garden behind her with plants that are plants that she popularized in Balboa Park. And Randy Laurie is doing a marvelous job in doing the maintenance behind Kate. It's a labor of love for him, because he so appreciates everything that she did for the park, and it really always looks good. So that's the West Mesa. We're going to be moving to the south and east, and these are probably areas of the park you'll be less familiar with. Starting with the administration building. The administration building for Parks and Recreation is over near Inspiration Point, just to the south of the municipal gym. And this was created as a garden when the administration building was part of the Navy Hospital. So these structures have been kept. It's a beautiful, restful, tranquil space in Balboa Park that very few of our visitors get over to see. And it has some interesting features to it. An example is a little pool area. There are a couple of pool areas in this section of the park. Some of them are less well maintained, again, because they're out of the public view. Parks and Recreation has had, like many businesses, has had tremendous challenges as a result of COVID. And they're only now getting back up to full staff. They were down to a very skeleton staff for a long period of time. And so I'm really looking forward to there being full staff and the park being maintained to its best advantage. South of this is a tiny area. It's actually called a regional park, but it's in the footprint of the original grant for Balboa Park. It's actually on the other side of the 5 freeway, and it's called Tweet Street. And it's a pocket park. It's only about 3 blocks long, and I would say it's not more than 20 feet wide, but it has this wonderful, fanciful theme to it of birds and bird houses and children and dogs. Here's one of the features in the park where it's explaining bird-friendly landscaping. And there's even places for the dogs that are being walked in the area. And now we've moved over. This shot is taken, this is on the West Mesa looking down into the canyon, Florida Canyon. This whole area that you're looking at with the bridge is called the Bennington Oak Grove. And it's a memorial to naval sailors from it was the worst naval disaster, non-warfare naval disaster took place in San Diego Bay when the USS Bennington, the boilers blew and exploded, and the ship exploded in the harbor. So the trees commemorate all of the sailors that were lost in this Bennington Oak Grove. And it's to the southwest side of the intersection of Pershing Drive and Florida Canyon. And the street that you see below you is 26th Street as it winds up the hill to Golden Hill. Recently, some of the trees had declined, and recently there was a tree planting of new oaks in this beautiful memorial space. Looking, the oak trees would be to your right, and as you look a little bit more toward the left is an area of the park called Golden Hill. Golden Hill is another neighborhood-like park. It's called Golden Hill. For a while, I thought it was because all of the rich people lived up on Golden Hill, but I was told by Kathy Poplava, who's a horticulturist in the park, that it was planted with the golden wattle, these acacias that bloomed and covered the hillside with gold. I'm hoping that at some point in time, more of these trees can be replanted. The acacias that are there now are not the really lovely ones. But it's a quiet space in the park. There are many picnics that are held there. And it's an area that has a very interesting feature. And this is the feature. It's a grotto. It was the first hardscape feature that was developed in Balboa Park. And this feature was lost for many years because it wasn't maintained. The plants grew it over, and essentially nobody knew it was there. But the Boy Scouts helped to dig it out, and with help they cleaned it up. And this is the feature that was designed as a way spot and fountain. Originally, there was water that pooled at the top, and it dribbled down into this fountain. And I'm not sure if it recirculated. It probably recirculated. And there were the benches where people could sit. There's very little information about this. Nancy Carroll Carter has done a lot of the historical research on these spots in the park. But it's a nice, interesting, and kind of hidden feature in the park. Looking the other way is, of course, the Balboa Park golf course. And if you're not a golfer, you may not know it's there, but the golf course is completely included in Balboa Park. And now one of my favorite parts of the park is a small area at the northeast corner of Balboa Park. And I included this map so that you could see part of the intention of it. The area is about 6 acres and it's called Bird Park. So this is Upas Street along the north, 28th Street goes north-south, and Pershing Drive cuts up and intersects with Upas and 28th Street. And if you can see the outline here is a wedge shape. And along the back, this is the back of the bird or the bird park. And this is the artist's image of what the bird would look like. This was developed about 30 years ago in the park, and many of the features were included when it was first designed. It was not maintained for a very long period of time, other than the grassy area where people in the neighborhood play and enjoy concerts. The funny little piece right here is the gut of the bird, and it actually has stones in here representing the gizzard of the bird. And the utility boxes that are along here have information about birds. We had planted a decade ago in the beak of the bird, we had planted all plants that are things that birds eat or attract insects that birds eat. And then on the other side of Pershing Drive is the nest of the bird, which is a toddler lot with equipment, and it has a short fence around it to keep them contained. So more recently, the California Native Plant Society has adopted and is starting to adopt feathers of the bird one at a time. And they're planting them with California native plants so that this part of the bird will attract the native birds, which will nest and feed and enjoy, as well as the people in the park, so that the park will start to live up to its name a little bit more. So this was just planted, December a year ago, and it's really looking good. And it included in it was a bioswale, and with our rains, the bioswale is definitely working. The idea of the bioswale is that it will capture the water when it rains. The water will then filter down into the water table and water the plants into the dry season. And as you can see, this was when it was first planted. Another whole realm of Balboa Park is the Morley Field Sports Complex. And this includes all kinds of sports, from a velodrome to baseball courts to tennis courts, the swimming pool, a bocce ball court. I don't know if it still exists because I haven't walked over in that area right now, but there used to be a fly fishing pond. There's a disc golf, all kinds of sports in the sports complex here on the East Mesa. And Parks and Recreation did the planting for this median. I think they really did a lovely job, and it's been really well maintained. This whole area, and this is just right to the sign, right of the sign that you see, was eucalyptus grove. Woo! I need a drink of water. This entire area was eucalyptus. With the rains that we've had and the relatively short depth of the soil, that grove started to fail a number of years ago. And it was deemed not wise to replant it in eucalyptus. So this area now houses a wonderful collection of ficus trees from around the world. And it's really a wonderful place to go and look at the incredible diversity of a single species of plants. They're tall plants, short plants, big leaves, dark green leaves, bright green leaves, all types of ficus, thanks to one of our Parks and Rec in interest in this collection in the park. And here's just an example. Just you can see that they're both ficus. They both have kind of waxy leaves, but they're very different in color and size and texture. And finally, there's the native plant demonstration area. The tennis courts are built, of course, they have to be leveled, but then there's the side of the canyon for Florida Canyon. And this little demonstration area was planted a number of years ago, just to show a nice diversity of California native plants. And this isn't exactly a garden, but it's a direction that some parks are going in now, and I'm really excited that we have it in Balboa Park. It's behind the tennis courts, and this is called Nature Play. And the whole idea of this is to invite children's imaginations. So there are sticks, there are logs, there are rocks, and kids can do whatever they want to do with the materials, natural materials that are available there for them. And it's very interesting to see at different times what different groups of children have done. And this is a direction that parks are going in, and I think it's very healthy. So, this has been the park, but there are lots of things that still need to be done. Obviously, the restoration of the botanical building. The Palm Canyon has declined and needs redevelopment. There's an Australian collection in the park that needs to be tended to and refreshed. There are plans to develop the area around the historical carousel in the park. The Natural History Museum is underway with planting their perimeters with native plants, and I've been involved with that. It's a very exciting project. I can't wait until that gets started. There are many trails in the park that need restoration. The Balboa Park master plan is over 30 years old now. It's time to be reconsidered. The East Mesa landfill has never been closed as a landfill, and therefore it's not available to anyone. And I've had, of course, my Adopt a Block program and the Trees to Treasures, which involve a lot of my time and energy, and I'm so excited to be involved in the park. And that's the end. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Lucy. That was the most informative, beautiful, and inspirational talk I've heard in a long time. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Can't wait to get to Balboa Park and visit some of these lovely places you've pointed out to us.
Great.
Does anyone have questions? Is there any? Let's see, I'm just checking the chat to see if we have anything going on there. I don't see anything. While we're here, I just want to remind everyone, June 20th, we will be visiting the Japanese Friendship Garden in person in Balboa Park for that'll be our gardening session for that month. And thank you once again, Lucy. It's just amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good. Oh, I see some chats now. Oh. I'm not the only one who's in awe of your wonderful talk.
It's a fantastic place.
It is. And you really presented it in a wonderful light. I mean, you covered so much. It was a really, really wonderful.
With over 1,000 acres.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.